All right, hi everybody. My name is Keith McKenzie. I'm the Content Strategy Manager of Workable. And welcome everybody to this little webinar that we're doing on the topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. And I have two guests here with us. One is Hang Ni and the other is Chikari Ikbokwi. And they are basically HR and recruitment experts from London who can share some insights on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. So Hang, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks Keith. My name is Hong Lee. I'm a curator of an online community newsletter podcast called Recruiting Brain Food. And I'm really delighted to be here and looking forward to this conversation.
Awesome. And Chikari?
Hello, Keith. Thank you so much. And hi, Hung. My name is Chikere Ibokwe. I'm the founder of Inclusive, which is a DEI consultancy, and Allyship, which is a community for allies based in London.
Awesome. Great. Well, thanks for being with us. So the whole topic of this whole presentation is about some data that we have collected from a very interesting survey we did a couple of months ago. It resulted in a survey report titled "All Roads Lead to DEI, but which road do you take?" And the general consensus is that the vast majority of people in the workplace are on board with DEI progress and going forward with that. However, there's not much consensus on how you go about it. And there actually are some imbalances between different groups of people as to whether there is actually progress happening in the workplace. So the agenda here, we're going to first talk about the gender divide, the difference in responses between male and female. Number two, we're going to talk about the responsibility, who should own that kind of progress in a company. Number three, the disproportionate burden of responsibility, like who is actually carrying that burden, that responsibility. Number four, what are the actual challenges that block progress or impede progress? And number five, we've got some very interesting statistics that show how the respondents in the UK and Ireland are a little different from those who are not in the UK and Ireland. Okay, so we'll start with the gender divide. So as we know, during the pandemic, the imbalance between male and female in terms of the impact of the pandemic on people is quite marked, and our data sort of shows this. When we asked people, is DEI personally an important topic for you? We found that the differences between male and female are quite huge. For those who said, yes, it always has been important to you, we found that 73.3% of females said it's always been important, compared with just 65% of males. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we found that only 3% of females said that DEI is not important, compared with 12% of males. So there's quite a big difference there. So I want to ask Shikari why she thinks that might be the case.
Well, first and foremost, what I want to say is that, DEI, it should be, important to everybody, and I feel that, those who have actually said that it's not important to them, it'd be quite interesting to find out why. And I think for the men who feel, it doesn't affect them at all, or it's not important to them, why? Why is it not? It should affect every single person, And I'm, going back to what you actually said about the women as well, those women or those people who've actually said it doesn't affect them. Again, why doesn't it affect them? I think, when we look at gender and the gender divide, I think, it's everybody's responsibility, it's everybody's job, and we should ensure that the workplace is diverse and inclusive for everyone. It should be everyone's issue and problem. So I guess it's just because there must be certain reasons or certain aspects why it doesn't affect certain people. Certain people feel it doesn't really affect them. And again, for those, who've actually said, yes, it has always been really, really important. Again, it'd be quite interesting to find out from them why they think it is. And, we can really delve a bit deeper into the data as well, when we look at intersectionality, because, for example, if I had to take myself, I'm not just a female, I'm also a Black female. And I feel, sometimes my experiences may be different to maybe a white female's experience as well. So we can actually delve into the intersectionality of these as well. But that's my view. That's my take, and that's my view in it. I really do think it should be an important topic for everybody, regardless of gender. Really, it's everybody's responsibility to ensure that we all feel included within an organisation, regardless of our gender, really.
What do you think, Hung?
Well, I can't disagree with a single word Chikere has said there. I think, though, it's not a surprise to have if you like, a difference of results from the respondents there. And I think this is just the nature of privilege to a large degree, whereby privilege is generally invisible to the people that are privileged. It's actually a condition of privilege is that you don't experience it. You walk around without even knowing that that's the case because the thing's been set up for you. And it wouldn't surprise me that if we went down all of the different ways in which people identify, we'll probably find a pretty consistent pattern whereby the people that are privileged in that particular context will probably have less of an interest in the topic as an issue because they've personally never encountered it as an issue. So I don't think the data is particularly surprising. I don't think that it kind of gives us a little bit of an idea of where we've got to go and what we've got to do. And there's a big education piece involved here. I'm a little bit encouraged, I have to say, by the fact that there is, what would be useful actually, Keith, would be maybe to do a similar survey over time and see whether there's any trends that will affect sort of the variance of the responses. I would hope that the gap will close as more people do become more aware of these issues, even if they do come from a privileged position. But this, for me, is a description of, the invisibility of privilege.
And just to jump on what Hung has said, I totally agree. And I talk about privilege all the time. I think the problem with privilege is that, sometimes those who have privilege just don't understand what it means to have privilege, and I've spoken to so many people about privilege, and it's a case of, I didn't grow up in opulence. I wasn't rich. They don't understand the meaning of privilege. So it's quite important that Hung has brought that up, and I totally agree with him.
Absolutely. I think I can have a personal experience with this too, as far as privilege and being unaware of it. The Me Too movement, which happened, I guess, about 5-ish years ago, for me, it was quite powerful, personally, for me, because I guess up to that point, if you had asked me if there was a real imbalance between the experiences of male and the experiences of females in overall society, I would have said, yeah, I guess maybe a little bit, but I wouldn't have thought too deeply on it. And I would have said, being me who I am, I haven't seen any of it, so I guess it's probably okay. But then the Me Too movement started, and I see my Facebook getting filled up with all my friends and family who are female, all saying, yes, I have also experienced such and such. And it was quite striking to me. It made me realize, basically, an epiphany. Like Hang said, I just didn't really realize how how prevalent this was in our society. And of course, I was not aware of it because I'm a white man, so I don't experience this personally. I don't see it personally. However, this made a big difference. So I think it would be really interesting to do a survey again soon on this.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, one of the weird things, it's not that weird when you think about it, it's like how human beings basically build reality. We can only build it from personal experience. And things don't become real to us until we actually experience them, the abstractions. And what we know from cognitive psychology is that abstractions basically aren't particularly good at motivating action. They just, ideas, but unless you ground them or connect them with something that's emotionally felt, they typically don't motivate action. And we might be able to touch on that a little bit as we talk through the topics that you outlined there, Keith. I think there was an action point at some point in the slide there, but if there isn't, we can talk about that as well. But yeah, if you don't directly experience it, it's an abstraction, therefore minimized, it's kind of invisible, you'll get on with your day. I think a lot of people will probably care about it in an abstract way, but because they don't directly experience it, they'll assume that it's something that, yeah, it's taken care of, or, yes, I care about it, but then they'll switch to norm. So it's important we have education. It's important we teach empathy. It's important we kind of teach perspective, and important to teach that we don't have, none of us have, a full view of the universe. We all have to accept that our own lived reality is different from other people's lived realities. And if we adopt that point of view, then I think that's step one towards having a more empathetic understanding of others.
Agree. I totally agree, because I think education is vital. That whole education and awareness. It's, and as Hung said, it's a case of, if I'm not experiencing it, it doesn't exist. And I think we need to be aware that these things do exist for certain people in our society. And I think we need to understand and realize that the glass ceiling is definitely alive and kicking. You just look at C-suite organization, look at the C-suite level, there's a blatant lack of representation in terms of gender, so it's definitely important that education and awareness is something that we all, strive to constantly learn and be aware of.
Absolutely, that's why training becomes very important. That's part of the education in the workplace. Having training sessions and seminars, especially for senior leadership. So if you're aware of it, there will be a trickle-down effect throughout the company.
There's actually some debate on that, actually, Keith. But maybe the time doesn't allow us for us to get there. But there's some evidence to say that training might actually be counterproductive in these cases, primarily because if the idea is abstract, then the way to get people to really respond is to emotionally connect them to these things. The distribution of facts is not going to work. So in other words, if someone thinks that I've not experienced X, and you just present a bunch of facts and say, yeah, well, X is happening, it doesn't really work. We need to find another way to explain different perspectives. So yeah, the training thing, we need to review in terms of how it's delivered, what it is we're actually delivering. This extends to politics, like we've seen it in politics last several years, haven't we? Like the sharing of facts doesn't have any impact whatsoever. In fact, what it does is create more defensive posture from the person you're trying to persuade. So it's very interesting why facts don't work. We need to understand that. There's no point like browbeating people. It doesn't work. We need to find a better technique for persuasion.
That's fascinating. I would love to go into a big conversation about that, because that kind of goes into the know-how and the responsibility, and how do we deliver results in terms of DEI in the workplace. So maybe there's not a way to do it. Maybe there are better ways to do it. So that's kind of a natural opportunity for us to dive into the next topic here, the topic of responsibility for DEI. So a question we asked in our survey was, in your own opinion, who should be responsible for overall DEI initiatives in your company, if any. And we saw there were pretty significant differences in the responses from executives and directors and managers compared with entry-level and individual contributors. So the consensus is pretty clear that everybody should be responsible for this. But then when it came to responses saying that executives and managers should be responsible, there is a pretty significant difference. Those at the employee level, entry level, individual contributor level were more likely to say that those at the top should be responsible, whereas those at the top were less likely to say that they should be responsible, which I found very interesting. So what is going on here? What do you think, Hung?
Again, I mean, I don't think it's hugely surprising. It's very encouraging to say that, to see that the most popular choice was everybody. I think that that's a step change in this conversation. I think you rewind back even 3 years, let's say, probably a lot of responses would say it belongs to this department. Like HR would probably be a much larger percentage. If this question or survey was conducted in 2017 or 18, HR would probably double that. Those bars be a lot longer. So I think it's great that it's moved out of HR and it's become something that is a holistic challenge for a business. The division of responsibility between exec and management. I wonder how much that is just kind of where the buck would finally stop. And ultimately we can kind of answer positively in both senses. Like everyone owns it in terms of we all need to be activated in DE&I initiatives. But who is accountable for it at the end probably does rest with leadership at some point. Like their job is to set the conditions where these contributions can produce the outcomes that the community seems to agree on wanting. So I think you can answer positively in both cases in this case.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree, Hung. I think yes, it should be everyone's responsibility. It's important, but we definitely need the buy-in of senior leaders. Senior leaders need to show that they value and they're going to do something about diversity and inclusion. So yeah, I think it's good to see that. I think as Hung was saying, not too long ago it was definitely falls into the HR remit to actually own it, but everybody within the organization should own it, and it should definitely be senior leaders who are driving diversity and inclusion. So yeah, it's definitely good to see that data.
Absolutely. And what you're saying, Hung, you observe that that it's a natural now coming out of HR, and now everyone is kind of holistically involved in this whole thing.
Yeah, I think so. I think critical, right? I mean, I think for a long time, HR's tried to champion these initiatives, and for various reasons that may actually be not related to these topics. HR has always kind of struggled to push change from HR. It's always been a kind of an implementer of other people's ideas. And I think one of the best things HR's been able to do is to make sure that everyone is activated in this space, and it's not something that is a HR initiative, because any departmental initiative typically doesn't travel far, but probably especially so if it's a HR thing.
Definitely agree. And I think also we need to stop seeing, I think we need to see more active action rather than performative action as well. So let's all understand why D&I is important. Why is D&I important for the organization? And how can we show that we are active in any initiative or action that we actually do, rather than being performative, just doing it because everyone else is doing it, so let's do it. So that's something else which I think organizations should try and show that they mean it. Change needs to happen.
It's interesting you're saying that because one of the other questions we had at the survey was, what is your major motivator? What is your number one motivator in pushing DEI at
Mhm.
work? And the top answer was the more imperative. It's because it's the right thing to do. And that was far beyond the business keyword. Like, oh, it's better business to have DEI than to not have it. And so what we're saying here is it's just absolutely something that needs to be done. We don't need to have a keys for it. It's the right thing to do to go to the next level. So if it was just the business case, it would be easier to say this department owns it, or this other person over here owns it, and they can move the needle. But we're far beyond that point.
Mm.
Okay, let's move over to the next slide. Now, this one is about the disproportionate burden of responsibility. So we're talking about who is actually owning that progress in their own organization. So that's what we asked in the survey. Are you tasked with executing on DEI initiatives in your own work capacity? And we saw some pretty significant differences. Those who were female were more likely to say yes, much more likely than male. Those who were other, basically non-binary in everything, they were also more likely than male to say yes. The DEI initiatives were part of their job. And on the no side, males were more likely, much more likely to say that it was not part of their day-to-day work. So what's going on here? What do you think, Chikari?
Well, I think this is a problem, really. I think a lot of leaders I speak to, you know, the minorities are always the ones who feel they have to be tasked with owning, you know, the DEI initiatives. And why is that? You know, why is it the case that females are tasked with owning the, you know, the DEI initiative when it should be everybody? You know, it should be everyone's job to do that. And it's a case of why do, you know, maybe you know, other groups, be it non-binary or male, feel that they shouldn't, you know, be owning or executing the initiative. You know, I think it, you know, as we mentioned previously, it should be everybody's job to actually execute it, and not the minority, you know, group shouldn't do that. So I think, again, it's all down to education and awareness. And I think once, you know, everybody understands and realizes the importance of DEI and understands that it's everybody's job, you know, I think we will continue to have this kind of data thrown at us, you know, and I think this definitely has to change. So that's, you know, that really is quite interesting, but I'm not surprised because, as I said to you before, you know, when I speak to leaders or when I speak to minority groups, this is what I find, you know, I find this happens all the time.
Do you think, Hung?
I think it's interesting. It'd be interesting to see a little bit more on the data on this, because firstly, if plus the language a little bit. So DE&I initiatives, the idea of it being an initiative, for instance, does strike me as if it's, you know, a little bit belonging to a group of people. It's almost the classic, you know, that 12% or whatever. I think it's in HR. So we need to stop thinking of it as an initiative, I wonder. And as you say, it should just be baked into business processes. But if we've asked the question in this way, I do wonder whether people might have just thought, hang on, I'm not part of any official initiative. Therefore, you know, yeah, it's not, I'm not tasked with it. So how we've asked the question, I think, is important. The second thing on the percentages, I wonder whether this is percentile of respondents or overall capture of the survey group. For instance, how we normalize the distribution of the survey respondents. If we're saying, for instance, 68% of females have said yes, I mean, do you know, Keith, maybe you know this straight away, but I don't want to, we may be getting into too much technical depth for the purpose of this chat. But anyway, what I'm saying is, okay, the main learning from me here is if we call it initiative, then I think we're going to get this type of result. Where we want to get to is these are simply things that we need to care about, irrespective of job function, irrespective of seniority, irrespective of personal identity. And that is the end game is probably that in terms of distribution of responsibility, should we say?
Yeah, and also I think maybe we should think about DEI being embedded into the culture of an organization, as well, so that everybody knows that the importance of it, so everybody feels responsible and feels that they can actually take it on as well.
Yeah, very good point. I mean, it'd be interesting to see. So again, I mean, I'm now academically fascinated by the survey response, Keith. And sorry, guys, if everyone get bored of this, but I'm just thinking, okay, what is the type of company also, and how old is that company? Meaning, the maturity of a business, what type of company, and what is the historical sort of workforce composition of that company. I think all of those things will impact these results. So some segmentation I think here will be very interesting. And even I think Chikere, you and I had this conversation earlier about location. A metropolitan headquarters of a software company or a company that's in media or whatever it might be, as dealing with kind of at the leading edge of these social trends, will probably produce a different set of results from a warehouse in Luton or something. And that's simply a different workforce composition, a different historical context. But anyway, this is just more granular stuff that we need to dig into and explore a bit further.
I agree with you. I think it is an opportunity to do a smaller survey at some point in the future to really get into these specifics, to understand it at a deeper level. Absolutely. Okay. Now, what we asked the same question. The same question we segmented it differently. We had divided respondents according to whether they identified as a minority in both the work and local communities, or as a minority only at work, or as a minority only in their local home community, or not identified as a minority. So I just want to give some context to this. The reason I said work and home being two different things is you can have someone coming from their family, they feel like they're at home and they're not a minority in their own local neighborhood or whatever. And then they go to work and then they become a minority. And the same thing vice versa. We see a lot of this happening when people commute to the office. So I wanted to really get into this data, and we found that of those who said that they were a minority in both at work and their local communities, and for those who identified as a minority at work, again, were more likely to be to say yes to whether they were tasked with executing on DEI initiatives at work. So there's probably some overlap between this and the previous graphs, but I will not Chikere address this. What do you think is happening?
It's really interesting, actually. And I think, delving back into what Hung said about the previous data, it'd be interesting to try and get more information from it. It's difficult to actually, almost like see what's actually happening there. Tasked with initiative, your own capacity based on respondents. It really, it's if you look at the yes, with the minority in both work and local communities, and the minority but only in my work community, it'd just be, again, interesting just to try and get more information. The results are quite close. Again, very, very interesting. I'll let Hung go ahead and see what, you know, what he can sort of like decipher from
Yeah,
that.
by the way, folks, if you're watching this or listening to it, you know, when we're studying data of this type, we're all just like sifting sort of the tea leaves a little bit. And so none of this is like bulletproof. But what I can see a little bit on this, I mean, just as a speculation, I wonder whether people that are like always in a minority, the people who always feel that they're in a minority, I wonder whether that may kind of create a sense of consciousness that isn't present in people that don't you know, and not in that situation. So I wonder whether that in itself might kind of create more impetus for action. Perhaps they end up wanting to be part of initiatives to change that status quo. Or it could be that they become more regularly identified by the business as someone who is suitable to do this. I read an interesting blog post today about a young lady. I'm going to promote this into the Brain Food newsletter this week. I thought it was a really well written blog post. And she was explaining, this is on gender rather than ethnicity, but she was explaining the examples, or the 4 examples where she had experienced a discrimination, let's say, based on her gender. And one of those examples was actually her identity as a woman and as a female developer led her to be consistently identified as the person to deal with DE&I. So her identity itself was perceived by this business to say, you know what, the suitability of someone to take leadership on it is actually that individual. Which of course is massively debatable. And in the case of this young lady, she was very put about by that, you know, because suddenly she had all kinds of concerns as to her true role within the business. You know, was her true role actually to be a developer, you know, producing code, or was it to be some sort of person that would improve the demographics? So there's another challenge with DE&I in large regard, like how do we treat people who, if we're going to expand the pipeline, for instance, and bring people in from different communities that we've previously ignored, how do we ensure that those people coming in understand that they're there to fulfill the function of the job as the primary function, and not there in essence to make up the numbers, or to, you know, provide you know, some cosmetic improvement in terms of the stats. There's a little bit of a risk we might be going down that route when you're seeing things like, you know, when we're publishing diversity data, for instance. I think in the US in particular, when you're doing SEC filings these days, I think you need to produce HR analytic data now to say, you know, things like workforce composition topics need to be produced publicly. Now, ostensibly, that's a fantastic idea, fine idea, you would imagine, and it will kind of change the facts on the ground. There's going to be more women on boards. There's going to be more ethnic diversity in various stages of management and so forth and so on. However, you might sort of also get into a situation where perverse incentives are created. And in that circumstance, the people that we want to create an inclusive environment for, we want to create an inclusive environment for everybody, by the way, but particularly those that have previously been excluded. What you don't want to do is have them walk in and get the sense that they're there to hit the number, because that's a really destructive thing for people to have to think about and carry. So like your confidence, it will be really damaged, and that will then result in performance issues, and it will result into almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. So really, really important that we figure and think carefully about all of these things before we rush to implement.
I totally agree, because Hung and Keith, you know, it's a case of why does the DEI initiative always fall on the onus of the minority employee? Why is that the case? You know, I speak to people all the time, and not every single minority person wants to, you know, deal with DEI initiative. They want to get on with their day job. So I think organizations have to be very, very careful when they when they do that, when they almost pin the DEI initiative on the onus of the minority employee. So I think that has definitely got to be watched. So yeah, I totally agree with what Hung's just said about that.
Excellent. It's very thoughtful responses. Thank you. Okay, now we're going on to the next one, which is about the major challenges that impede DEI progress. So we asked respondents overall, what are the major challenges that your company faces in meeting stated DEI targets? That is assuming that they have targets, they've already stated their targets in DEI. We want to have this level of demographics. We want to have this kind of a response in our employee surveys and whatever. We have targets to meet. Now, what's impeding your progress to those targets? The number one response was creating a sustainable strategy that lasts over time. And then the next two most popular responses were talent pool responses. Limitation to the talent pool in your industry and limitation to the talent pool in your location. And then after that is executive buy-in. So what kind of insights do you have on this, Hung?
Yeah, I think it's a really great question to ask all of the respondents there. And the consciousness that, the need to create a sustainable strategy, the consciousness of that, I think is really welcome, that's the top ranking response, because it suggests that the people that have responded are aware that a cosmetic, paint job over the top is not going to do the job, but you need to have a fundamental change. So that's very, very encouraging. One thing that struck out very interesting for me is the talent pool in location. That's also super interesting, and it's going to open up an avenue of questioning that's going to be, I think, really quite challenging for us to think about, or everyone to think about. So for instance, if we move to a remote only type of scenario, the opportunity for us to diversify the workforce will obviously improve, but is that what we mean? So in other words, if I'm like recruiting, I'm an all-white company, and I think, I need to get more diversity in my business. Does it mean that I should suddenly set up a dev shop in Manila, for instance? Is that what we mean by diversity, inclusion, and equity? We probably are just about thinking about answering that question or wrestling with that question. So that, I think, is a very interesting dimension. What they currently mean, I think, talent, I don't know when you did the survey, Keith, it might have been just mid-COVID, pre-COVID, something like that. I don't know when, but talent pool in location probably is a legit issue for different types of businesses. We talked about it earlier about, the metropolitan experience being different from a regional experience. There are towns out there. I come from one in the UK that literally is 99.5% white, right? So, and it's also not a very attractive place. That's why I left it. So you're going to struggle to import people into or attract people to that location, and you're probably never going to hit national standards as a result if you want to apply those rules. So I think the way to do this is really not to think too much. There's a risk that you apply those overly broad standards and make that comparison. The most relevant comparison is with yourself and your own progress as a business. So in other words, over time, you would want to see a greater diversification of the workforce as you go. And then the relevant factors as to the local talent pool and all the rest of it will be factored into that. It's not a case where, if you're there's a big software company in the Northeast, as an example, Sage, I think they're up there in Newcastle, which is a big metropolitan town, but it's still nothing like London in terms of ethnic diversity, right? They're not going to have the same talent pool that any software company in London is going to have. And that model can be replicated in any big city versus regional city. So we have to be careful about national standards. What we want to see is what Sage should be doing is measuring year on year their own progress over time in terms of, diversification of the workforce and so forth. But anyway, that's my initial hot takes on that chart.
Yeah, really interesting actually. And I think for me, the standouts were definitely sustainability of the DEI strategy and talent pool, because even in such a big London, such a big city as London, such a big diverse city, and I know Hung, you probably agree with me, we still have organizations, talking about the lack of diverse talent, and I guess it does depend, what are we recruiting for? Are we recruiting for engineers? Are we recruiting for female engineers? So I guess it just depends, what we're actually recruiting for. And I totally agree, in terms of talent, the talent pool by location or by industry, was this pre-COVID? The working world has definitely changed, and will we really go back to the office full time? I think that's something that will change as well. But that's also something that will probably, as Hung was saying, will help us with our talent pool. If we are working much more remotely now, surely we can try and, find more diverse talent. Yeah, but really, really interesting observations there.
Absolutely. I'll share some insight on this to answer your question, Hung. This survey took place in about November 2020. So it's pretty deep into COVID.
Yep.
Yeah.
But we did find those who we found those in the manufacturing sector were more likely to say that the talent pool was a problem in their location. That was a limiting factor. So now I'm going to go off on a limb to say that those in manufacturing may not be able to go remote as much as other sectors. So that's probably a factor. Which going back to what we're talking about, it's just if you're limited by the demographics in your location, I mean, it's pretty tough to make progress in terms of diversity. Yeah. Anyway, so finally, the last one, we're going to talk about the specific findings based on those who responded from the UK and Ireland. We found some pretty interesting differences between those in the UK and Ireland compared with those who are in the US and Canada and other parts of the world. So can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So we found a pretty significant difference in response to the question, what is the current state of DEI in your company? And we found that UK and Ireland responses were more likely to say that they're interested, but they just don't know where to start. And we found that those who were not in the UK and Ireland were already had some actions in place. So that accounts for a small part of that imbalance. So what I'm getting from this is that those in the UK and Ireland are interested. They just don't know, what to do. So, Chicken, do you want to shed some insight into this?
Yeah, this is quite interesting actually. So what are we talking about? Are we talking about, are we talking about just gender? Are we talking about race? Because what I have found is that pre-COVID, pre the crazy pandemic that we're still unfortunately in, pre-Black Lives Matter protests, and as I said, I've always said this, when organizations and when we have spoken about DEI, we spoke about, everything but race, okay? And I think organizations felt more comfortable talking about everything but race. So it'd be quite interesting in terms of, the answers, because what I have found is that a lot of organizations do say that when they look at DEI, they're happy to talk about it, but what they found quite difficult is the race element in DEI, because it's something, especially in the United Kingdom, it's something that we have never had to talk about. And I think, all of a sudden, organizations are, thrust in the forefront of talking about race. So it'd be quite interesting to find out, in terms of the percentages, we are interested, but don't know where to start in terms of what, so don't know where to start in terms of, DEI generally, talking about gender, race, everything, or are they don't know where to start in terms of just talking about a specific segment of DEI. So, are they finding it quite difficult to talk about the race element? Are they talking about, in terms of gender? So that would be quite interesting, to delve a bit more into the data just to find out, what they, what are they finding that they can't, that they don't know where to start from.
That would be a really interesting question. Now thinking back, I would have loved to include that question of what does DEI mean to you? What is the definition of it? Some people may say it's about gender, others will say it's about race. Still others would say it's just about a holistic feeling of inclusion in your company.
Exactly. And another thing we've got to remember, we're having other groups that are really coming into the workforce that we need to start talking about. We need to start talking about trans, we need to start talking about non-binary. So there are lots of other elements to, DEI that we need to start talking about. So it'd be quite interesting just to somehow dissect that data a bit deeper, just to find out a bit more.
Absolutely. What do you think, Han?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, this is a tough one to make commentary on. It's not clear. It's not entirely clear what we can say about it, in the sense that it could be, for instance, that the non-UK folks have either started or not. It may be that when you say they're interested but don't know where to start, maybe they're already started and they're already well ahead of it, or they're completely new to the idea of DE&I. So yeah, we need to dig a bit deeper into the data on this one, I think, Keith.
Okay, great. Okay, I think there's another piece of data next. Yeah. So we asked the question, in recruiting and hiring specifically, what are the major challenges that your company faces in meeting stated targets? And we found that UK and Ireland respondents were more likely to say that they don't know how to do it. 11.5% in the UK and Ireland, compared with just 2.4% in non-UK and Ireland. So
I want to say something, Keith, because I reckon here there is, and I'm guessing, by the way, that the other respondents predominantly of the survey are US, North America based, where I've seen an evolution of a very more explicit way to recruit so-called diverse candidates. So for instance, in the US, the idea of diverse being an adjective as a descriptor is very widely used. So you can be a diversity recruiter, for instance, or you can be a person that's targeted to hire diverse candidates. In the UK, and I would guess in Ireland as well, that's typically not used as in the same way as an adverb. So diversity here, I believe, is more contextual rather than as being possessed by any particular individual, which may mean that we don't have the level of maturity to understand what it means to recruit these things. So in other words, one of the things that is definitely true is in the US has been a huge producer of diversity recruiting strategies, particularly in the sourcing community. You see, people building custom search engines that do diversity sourcing. You also have, again, this is definitely a US thing compared to UK. In the US, for instance, you have historically Black colleges, and I think this is a legacy of a segregation that has simply continued in a slightly different form. I hope I'm not offending anyone, by the way, but I'm simply observing from the outside. But in the UK, that's simply not the case, where the university entrance system, yes, there is sort of not equal distribution of ethnicities in any of those institutions, but there wouldn't be anything like a Black university, for instance, which would be a classic sourcing site. For instance, if you're a recruiter, you'd say, you know what, we're going to recruit at a university X because we know that is a Black university. In the US, that is a possible recruiting strategy. In the UK, that is not necessarily as possible because it isn't explicitly that way. So yeah, I think basically we can the difference of the responses here, I think, is can be a description of the difference of the diversity conversation across the Atlantic. I think most organizations probably point in the same direction, but we've kind of looking at it from slightly two different parallel routes, if you like, going towards the same direction. And we have different terminology, sometimes different concepts to describe what may ostensibly be the same thing.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. And also, is it the case of the recruiters in the UK are using the same old recruitment practices?
That's a possibility as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And also, it's a case of most. Is the case of are all recruiters the same type of people? So it's almost like that kind of affinity bias. Are they recruiting from the same schools, from the same universities, using the same talent pools? So are they not delving out to try and recruit a bit more diversity? So it'd be quite interesting again. To find out, but yeah, interesting data there.
There's really fascinating conversation about that. Being knowing the differences between, say, the UK and the US in this regard. Okay, let's go quickly through this one because we only have a few minutes left. So, this is one of the most interesting insights we found that. In terms of the question, do you feel like your company is making meaningful progress in DEI? So we found the UK now and responses were much more pessimistic.
Yeah.
With 56% saying yes, compared with 75% saying yes in the rest of the world. So what's happening?
Do you know something? What I would love there, it would be interesting just to define meaningful progress. What does meaningful progress mean? Just to put a spanner in the works.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? What does that mean? Meaningful progress to myself and Hung and you could be totally different to what, the way other organizations see it. Meaningful progress to me as a recruiter would mean that I am, recruiting, regardless of, I'm recruiting a diverse talent pool of candidates, regardless of their race, gender, age, sexual orientation, and the list goes on. And I, am recruiting the best candidate for those positions, or best candidates for those positions. But I would love to find out what is meant by meaningful progress and how each company looks at their meaningful progress in a DEI, because more than likely each organization, each company will see meaningful progress is totally different, because meaningful progress to me will be different to them. But interesting set of data there again.
I think I meant to ask that question in a very holistic, in a very abstract way. Like, do you feel there's meaningful progress? So
yeah, what does that mean? Meaningful progress, it differs for each person. And does it mean, it's, it'd be quite interesting to know.
Absolutely, yeah. What do you think, Hung?
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting to see the divergence between UK and the non-UK. And again, I'm presuming responses being US, North America. Immediately, I'm going to potentially go to a stereotype to say, is it because the Brits are typically more reserved to be, effusive in saying, yes, this is amazing. Whereas the stereotype for the US is that, we're going to go more optimistic. Or it could be just a reasonably accurate reflection of the state of their own progress. That could be fair, but without sort of the raw numbers, it's hard to say. The only way I think you can really do it is to measure over time the progress per company, and then on aggregate those companies, and that data is actually quite hard to collect. It's not something that is always public. And it is usually locked into those companies. Within those companies, it may not even be maintained. So hopefully over time, we'll be able to get some of that info, and we can make very clear assessments as to what progress actually is happening.
Very cool. Well, thank you. Okay, so I wonder what's on the next slide. Okay. Okay, but let's take 1 minute to do this one, and then we'll try and wrap this up. So, again, we found some big differences between UK and Ireland and not UK and Ireland in terms of what the measurable data points are being targeted in terms of progress towards DEI goals. UK and Ireland responses were more likely to say demographics throughout the entire company, or much more likely to say that. Whereas non-UK and Ireland responses were much more likely to say demographics at the executive leadership level. And the third one is very interesting, promotion and advancement, basically equal opportunity throughout. Non-UK and Ireland were more likely, much more likely to say that that was a measurable data point that their company uses. So what do you think is happening here, Hung?
Again, my knowledge of US employment law is very, very sparse at best, but I wonder whether this has got something to do with things like affirmative action and stuff of that type, which are explicitly designed to progress people through the career ladder. Whereas in the UK, I don't think you're allowed to do that. I mean, Chicory, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, again, my knowledge of UK employment law is extremely poor. It may just simply reflect at a legislative level, what is permissible in businesses. So that's my initial take of this, is that the UK and Ireland responses will gear towards, what is the current state of the demographics rather than the distribution of again, I'm presuming ethnicity, maybe it's also gender at the exec level. Perhaps the US and Canada have different sort of different measures there. Perhaps a quota system is in existence in some of those states. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely, Hung. I totally agree. In terms of diversity data, there's some firms in the UK that don't even capture diversity data. Do you see what I mean? So again, interesting results, but I know, as I said to you, I'm speaking to organizations who don't even have diversity data. And also what they tend to do, they tend to bunch certain categories into one label. Like, for example, in the United Kingdom, we use the acronym BAME, whereby both myself and Hung will be in that category, won't we, even though we're so different in terms of our ethnicity and our gender. So again, yeah, interesting.
That's actually a real challenge. I mean, whenever you, and one of the things that we've got to wrestle with here when we're talking about trying to, create a more diverse workforce is, how do we create categories that aren't monolithic? Is it unavoidable? It probably is unavoidable to a certain degree, but we have to understand that sometimes they're gonna be inadequate. To call everyone a minority, for instance, and we'll ignore some of the very big differences in experience within those minorities and within those populations.
And experiences as well. Yeah.
100%. I mean, there's very little. I mean, just to use you and I as an example here, Chicory. We would have different journeys through to where we're at, experience different things, and the pressures that we've had to negotiate will be in different spots. And that would actually be the same also for yourself, Keith. Everyone has got different sort of journeys to go through. So again, I think we need to use, we can use a crude tool, which I think quotas generally are a crude tool, but they can be positively used in the right circumstance. I think it makes sense to have some measure and, take the risk that we are making these like big category decisions on people. I think that's useful for the time being, but we don't want to kind of go forward without understanding these can be flawed categories as well, and any situation where you are generalizing from an individual up, you run the risk of dehumanizing that person. That's what dehumanizing ultimately is where you eliminate the individual and you you know, calls that person or you treat that person as inherently representative of a group because of their identity, that is inherently an anti-human activity. So, so yeah, it's tricky. You know, this is a really, really hard challenge. And you know, I'm encouraged that people seem to be motivated to do something about it. I think we have seen enormous progress in the conversation and in the thought process. I think it has embedded in many respects as in people. People aren't talking about DE&I as a fad. You know, I think this is persistent. So I think we can be encouraged, but also, you know, as we pour forward on this, we're aware that this is a long road and it's a difficult one, and you know, we need all hands on deck to help us get there.
Totally agree, and I think it's just, you know, I'm really happy that we're having the conversation, Hung and Keith. I think it's been a long time coming, and I think, you know, organisations do want to start taking action, but as Hung said, you know, this is going to take a very, very long time, and you know, sometimes I wonder if it will ever you know, be sorted out in my lifetime. It probably won't be ever. It's probably a conversation that, you know, we'll always be having, but I'm just really happy that we're definitely addressing that and we're having a conversation. So yeah, that's a good thing.
Totally agree. The conversation is the most important thing. And now we're going to wrap this up, and I wanted to thank you both so much for a fascinating conversation. And obviously there's no end to it. There's so many different tangents we can go off on, but we've reached the end of our time, and but there will be other opportunities for more conversation like this. So thank you both. All right, thank you, everybody.
Brilliant, thank you.